well? Okay. Starting off kind of with a big picture in the book of Revelation we've been going through. We're getting ready to go into a section known as the Tribulation. It's about 14, 15 chapters long. So the majority of the book of Revelation teaches and deals on this one subject. And I thought, well, before we tackle that, it would be good to have some background. What are some of the other passages in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, that we need to have some familiarity with in order to grasp it a little bit better. And so we've been studying the book of Daniel. John's going to make great use of that, and it's going to be helpful and beneficial for us to have a bit of knowledge too. So today's goal, what I'd like to do, is to finish off the last couple of chapters of Daniel. If we have time, hopefully we can look at a few other Old Testament verses about the tribulation as well. And then with that under our belt, hopefully in the next week or two we can return to the book of Revelation, and with a broader base, a broader foundation, we'll have a good basis for tackling the bulk of Revelation, which is going to deal on this tribulation subject. So, if you would, in your Bibles, open with me please to the book of Daniel. Last week we had hit Daniel 9, which is it's kind of the heart of what we wanted to chat about. And I want to just do a quick little summary. In Daniel 9, if somebody would like to read just 2 verses for me, verses 26 and 27. This is the end of Daniel's prophecy on the 70 weeks. I just want to do a quick refresher here, and then we'll be on our way. So, Daniel chapter 9, verse 26 and 27, if you would please.
After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on a wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him.
Thank you. So what did we learn from that? What did we talk about last week? First of all, back in verse 26, it said, the people of the coming prince, that is the Antichrist, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And we know historically that was fulfilled. What people group did destroy Jerusalem? Remember that?
Greece.
Oh, it's a good guess. It's a good guess. Not Greece. It was the one after Greece. Who was in power after Greece? Yeah, it was Romans, and these were the people in authority in Jesus' time. Rome ruled over Jerusalem, and it was the Romans who destroyed it. So we said the Antichrist in some way is going to be connected with the Roman Empire. We're not exactly sure how. There's disagreements, because obviously Rome's power broke centuries ago. Of course, then again, God brought Israel back. Israel was destroyed in the year 70. God brought them back. Maybe he'll do that with Rome. Maybe a new empire will rise in Italy, in Rome. We're not exactly sure, but in some way, the Antichrist is going to be connected with the people, it says, who destroyed Jerusalem, and that was the Romans. So some connection there he's going to have with the Roman Empire. In verse 27, he says he's going to make, that is the Antichrist, he's going to make a covenant for 7 years. And so if you've got your timeline handy there, that's when the tribulation begins. People ask sometimes, well, what about signs, Dan? Are there any signs about the end times? Any things we should be watching for, looking for? Right here it says that the one thing that kicks off the 7-year tribulation period is Antichrist is going to sign a covenant with Israel. Notice he's going to do this where? Where's he at when he does this?
In the temple.
He's in the temple. There's a bit of a problem with that right now.
There is no temple.
There is no temple right now. In fact, there hasn't, like I said, in the year 70, Rome destroyed the temple. It's never been rebuilt. So Israel's back in the land. It exists as a country, but the temple doesn't. And a good reason for that is because where the temple used to be, what we call the Temple Mount, that hilly area where the temple, Solomon's temple and Herod's temple were built, right now is something else in its place.
Palestine?
It's the Muslims' Holy Land too.
Yeah,
For what it is.
Yeah, they've got their own mosque there. So the Bible pictures during this time period, the temple's back up. What does that imply?
Well, that mosque is gonna have to be torn down.
Sometime
We
between
have to do that.
now and then, yeah,
Let's go.
sometime between now and then, apparently, the mosque is destroyed, the temple is rebuilt, because the Antichrist is signing a peace treaty with Israel. Here, it's a 7-year process, and the Bible says in the middle of the week, so 3.5 years in, he's going to break it and set up what he calls the abomination of desolation, which we're going to read more about. Jesus talks a little bit about that in his Olivet Discourse. So that's something to watch for in world news. What's going on in Israel is always interesting. It's always fascinating. So keep an eye out on that.
Okay, real quick here. Okay, talk us through again how we know the Antichrist will come from Rome based on verse 26. I mean, I follow a little bit of what you're saying, but kind of dumb that down for me.
It says, back in verse 26, it says, the people of the coming prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, historically, that's already happened. That's already happened. In the year 70 AD, Rome, under a general by the name of Titus, went in and completely destroyed Jerusalem and tore down the temple stone by stone. So that part's not a mystery. We know who the people are because it's happened. Rome is the people. The curious thing is it says the people of the coming prince. So in some way, the Bible's connecting the Romans who tore down the city with the Antichrist. Now, how exactly does that play out? Again, we're not sure. The most common, the most prevalent view is that there's going to be a revived Roman Empire. You'll hear that phrase a lot if you study prophecy. They'll talk about the revived Roman Empire. Again, not everyone agrees with that. Personally, I think it's the best that I've heard of the different theories. It's the one I kind of favor. I wouldn't be dogmatic about it. But then again, like I said, God's revived Israel. Right? Israel was nothing. They were like the Philistines. It was just a name you read in the Bible. There wasn't any nation of Israel between the year 70 and the year 1948 when the United Nations restored them. For almost 2,000 years, Israel didn't exist as a people, as a nation, and God revived them. Will he do that with Rome? It seems to indicate that. Again, wouldn't be dogmatic about it, but that seems to be where the Bible's pointing there. That the Antichrist is connected with the people who destroyed Jerusalem, which was the Romans.
Okay, and then where he's standing in the temple signing this, take us there.
It says he will make a firm covenant with many for the 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and offering. Well, sacrifice and offering has to be done according to the Jewish law in one place and one place only. Had to be the temple. Jews in the Old Testament tried to sacrifice to God in other places. That was a big dividing point between the Jews and the Samaritans. The Samaritans sacrificed on another temple. You remember the story of the woman in the well, where Jesus is meeting this woman who's has been married 5 or 6 times. She tries to draw his attention away from her infidelity and ask a question about whether the Samaritan place of worship, which was not in Jerusalem, was okay. So, if the sacrifices and offerings are back in force, that implies the temple has to be rebuilt. And in fact, it specifies that in the very next sentence. It says, and the abomination of desolation will be on a wing of the temple. Well, how can you put the abomination of desolation in the temple unless the temple's been rebuilt in the first place? So there has to be a temple during this period of time, according to these verses. Which means it has to be rebuilt, which means first the mosque that's currently standing there in Jerusalem has to be torn down. So that's going to be interesting to watch the news. Yeah, we just have to wait and see.
Now, the people with different views on how to interpret Revelation, my understanding is they would say that there is not going to be a physical temple rebuilt, but that God's people now, the church, is serving as the temple. Is that, can you speak a little bit to that?
Oh, I would imagine that's correct. Yeah, the amillennial position tends to allegorize and spiritualize biblical prophecy.
Okay, so PCC would say that the temple is not, that God is done with the nation of Israel, that the temple is not going to be rebuilt, but that what they're talking about here is what Dan said, they're allegorizing and applying that to the church, the people, God's people today.
But in order for Antichrist to actually sign a treaty in the temple in Jerusalem, it would have to be a physical building.
Could be, the point here is this, and I think Dan.
Could be you're giving up your faith in the church as a whole, leaving true faith and signing a contract with the Antichrist. Doesn't have to be in the temple. It can just be the giving up of your true faith of what Christ calls us to.
Yeah, and I think Dan put it so beautifully when he said, I wouldn't be dogmatic about it. And I would go to say, don't be dogmatic about either position. The main point is we need to try to wrestle with and pray through and learn what the scriptures mean and try to connect the dots on our own with the help of the Spirit of God, because what Dan is doing here and taking us through this is exposing us to the different perspectives or different points in the Bible that a lot of times, frankly, none of us really look at because it seems to be over our heads. And so it's healthy to understand both positions, and Dan, we're blessed to have you leading us, and thank you.
It's a privilege, it really is. The amillennialists wouldn't get too bogged down because, and again, there's no one amillennial position. Everyone has kind of their own thing. Most of them don't believe in an Antichrist anyway, so it's all kind of a moot point. It's kind of a moot point. Anyway, moving on. Let's see. So let's see, let me just make sure we've hit everything. So the Antichrist appears to be from some sort of revived Roman Empire. There's going to be a peace treaty he's going to sign in the temple. When that happens, God's prophetic clock starts, and it's 7 years until the end of the world. When that happens, 7 years until the end of the world, when he signs that peace treaty in Jerusalem. I don't believe we'll be here to see that. I think the rapture is going to happen first. Again, can't be dogmatic about that. There's reasons I believe that. We've talked a little bit about, we might talk some more, but I don't believe we'll be here to see that. But when that does happen, 7 years until the end of the world, and that 7-year period is called the tribulation, and Jesus is going to have some more to talk about in his Olivet Discourse, which we're going to be getting to. Okay, chapter 10. We're not going to go into chapter 10. This is a really neat chapter. We've already hit quite a bit of it. Scott, when he was doing his presentation on angels, we've hit this pretty well. It's a fascinating chapter because it's one of the only places in the Bible where it talks about how angels influence government. And that's hard to imagine. We know we're in a spiritual warfare right now. The Bible says that. But it usually doesn't give us a lot of details. Daniel chapter 10, if that's something you're interested in, it's highly recommended. It talks about a little bit of detail about how the angels are involved in influencing governmental affairs. Especially important maybe with current events as they are. Interesting. So, maybe take a look at that. It doesn't deal too much with the end times. We're not going to cover it now. But like I said, if that's something that interests you, please take a look at Daniel chapter 10. Daniel 11 has a little bit of end times, which we'll be taking a look at here. But the main thing I want to draw your attention to in Daniel 11, if you're ever trying to defend the Bible against a secular humanist, against an atheist, this is a beautiful place to turn. What you'll want to do is have a history book in one hand and Daniel chapter 11 in the other hand, because he gives a timeline running from about the year 550 until about 160, so about 370 years or so, of detailed predictions of what's going to be happening in the world. In fact, it's so detailed that most atheists and secular humanists will point at Daniel 11 and say, this is impossible. It is so precise. It is so accurate that it is impossible that Daniel could have written it. It had to have been written centuries after the fact, and someone was just pretending to be Daniel. They wrote it from a history book because no human being could possibly have all these details. Again, we're not going to read through here, but if you're interested, seriously, grab a history book and just go through here and look at the dozens and dozens of specific details he gives. It's mind-blowing. It's one of the best places to show that God knows the future, he predicts the future, and he brings the future to pass. Daniel chapter 11, fantastic. It covers the kings after Alexander the Great. His nation broke into 4 pieces, and the generals each took a portion of that. So Alexander's empire broke into 4 parts, and then what happens next? Well, there's a power struggle. Each of those 4 parts for the next 200-300 years fight each other trying to get more land. And the Bible goes through and just prophesies what's going to happen there in great detail. One of those people is called Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a type or a foreshadow of the Antichrist. And that I do want to talk about because that is going to tie in with the end times. So, we're going to skip through most of chapter 11 again. I would take a look at that. But let's start with verses 21. In verse 21, the former king has been assassinated by his tax collector. Never trust an accountant. And the kingdom should go to his son. Right? That's how it worked. King dies, son becomes king. But the old king's brother, whose name is Antiochus Epiphanes, has other plans. He sabotages the king's son, which would be his nephew, and takes the throne for himself. So this is what we're reading about. This is the gentleman in question in verse 21. He is a type of the Antichrist. And we have what I would consider to be the double prophecy going on here, where the Bible starts talking about one person, and then partway through they kind of transition into someone else. And I'll point you out at the point where I think that happens. But let's go ahead and start reading in verse 21. And if someone would like to take 21 and just read, let's just read the rest of the chapter from 21 on.
He will be succeeded by a contemptible person who has not been given the honor of royalty. He will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away before him. Both it and a prince of the covenant will be destroyed. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully, and with only a few people he will rise to power. When the richest provinces feel secure, he will invade them and will achieve what neither his fathers nor his forefathers did. He will distribute plunder, loot, and wealth among his followers. He will plot the overthrow of fortresses, but only for a time. With a large army, he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south.
I'm going to interrupt for just a second. When the Bible, in the Old Testament, is mentioning directions, north, south, west, east, it's almost always in reference to Israel, from Israel's point of view. So here, the king of the south is a reference to Egypt. Thank you.
The king of the south will wage war with a large and very powerful army, and he will not be able to stand because of the plots devised against him. Those who eat from the king's provisions will try to destroy him. His army will be swept away, and many will fall in battle. The 2 kings, with their hearts bent on evil, will sit at the same table and lie to each other, but to no avail, because an end will come at the appointed time. The king of the north will return to his own country with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. He will take action against it and then return to his own country. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different from what it was before. Ships of the western coastlands will oppose him, and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back and vent his fury against the holy covenant.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second again. Ships of the western coast, that's a reference to Rome. Again, all this stuff, all these details, I know there's a lot here. The big thing I want us to take away up to this point is that all of these details have been historically fulfilled. Just as a point of interest, when the Antichrist, when Antiochus Epiphanes was going up against Egypt, Egypt had a pact going with Rome at the time for protection because Rome was in bloom. They were growing and becoming powerful, and Egypt needed protection against this king, Antiochus Epiphanes. And so when Antiochus is going up against the south, they call for help from Rome, and Rome sends one of their generals over. And Antiochus Epiphanes, while he's a pretty strong fellow, he's not stupid enough to take on Egypt and Rome at the same time. He knows he's going to get crushed. So he tries to be he's a weasel. This person who's a type of the Antichrist, this Antiochus, he's a weasel. He tries to weasel his way out of it. He tries to give vague assurances. And what the general does from Rome is he takes his finger and he draws a circle in the sand of the Egyptian desert. He draws a circle around Antiochus Epiphanes. And he says to him, before you step across that line, before you step out of that circle, I'm going to have an answer from you. You're either going to leave them alone or we're going to war. And that's where the expression "a line in the sand" comes from today. It's from Antiochus Epiphanes,
That's awesome.
being forced by the Roman general to give an answer that he could take back to the Roman Senate. Is it going to be war or not? Yes or no? Line in the sand. Okay, thank you.
His armed forces will rise up and desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation.
Okay, now, let's stop you there again. So Antiochus Epiphanes did decide to withdraw, so he's upset. He's angry, he's lost face with his men, and he's going back to his country, which is Syria. It's in the north. Well, what's in between Egypt and Syria? Well, it's Israel. He can't get back to his land. So he's upset, he's angry, and he decides to pick on the little people. He doesn't like the Jews anyway. And so he essentially outlaws Judaism. He goes to the temple, we've mentioned this before. He sacrifices a pig on the altar. He sets up an image of Zeus in the holy place. And anyone who doesn't go along with this, he simply kills. So that's what the reference, if you're thinking, Dan, what's abomination of desolation? That's a reference to the desecration of the temple. The sacrifice of the pig, which was an unclean animal. You couldn't even eat it, let alone sacrificing in the temple. Is absolutely unthinkable. And setting up an idol anywhere is awful. We know that from the Old Testament. But to set up an idol in the temple itself, you can't blaspheme much more than that. Okay. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
You're fine.
Yeah.
With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. When they fall, they will receive little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end. For it will still come at the appointed time.
Okay. Starting with verse 36, we start getting clues in the text that we're no longer just talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. We're talking about the end time where we're known as the little horn or the Antichrist. Be listening as we finish off chapter 11 here. There are going to be little phrases that suggest that we're talking about the end of the world. Now watch out for those as Ben finishes the chapter.
The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god unknown to his fathers. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and a cavalry and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. But he will also invade the beautiful land. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand.
It's present-day Syria.
He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain controls of the treasures of gold and silver and all the riches of Egypt, with the Libyans and the Nubians in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him.
Okay. What do you think?
What's the beautiful land?
What is the beautiful land? Any thoughts on that? Any ideas? Through Daniel, writing a book of prophecy for the Jews, about the Jews. What's the beautiful land? That's Israel. Yeah, that's Israel. Any other questions, comments?
Dan, when Daniel says unheard of things against the God of gods, why refer to any other gods as if God is over some lesser God?
I would suggest that God of gods is just a title that they use, sort of like King of Kings or Lord of Lords. There are other kings, gods, and lords with lowercase letters, but he's the same. I won't get too much into the details. Starting with verse 40, they talk about the end time, so that's one of the reasons we know that this isn't just about Antiochus Epiphanes. This is about the Antichrist. It gets a lot about wars and people attacking from one place or another. This gets into Armageddon, which we'll cover at the appropriate time. This is after the tribulation period, so I don't want to really hit on it now. I just wanted to point that out, and we can come back to it later. And I know we're long, I do want to hit chapter 12, at least parts of it here. Chapter 12.
Well, that clock's not right, is it?
No.
Oh.
Says, at that time, so at the same time we were just talking about, this is the end of the world, Michael, the great prince who stands watch over your people, and again there's a reference that angels are assigned to countries. Michael is assigned to Israel. Michael is assigned to Israel, it says that. He will rise up, there will be a time of distress such as never has occurred since nations came into being until that time. Tribulation period. But at that time all your people who are found written in the book will escape. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will wake, some to eternal life, and some to shame and eternal contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the bright expanse of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, keep these words secret and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will roam around, and knowledge will increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and two others were standing there, one on this bank of the river and one on the other. One of them said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long until the end of these extraordinary things? Then I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river. He raised both his hands toward heaven, and swore by him who lives eternally that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. Does anyone remember what we said that was a reference to? That phrase, time, times, and half a time?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. So that would be half of the tribulation period. When the power of the holy people is shattered, all these things will be completed. We're going to see that as Armageddon, and again I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, Israel is going to be attacked. And Jerusalem is going to be on the brink of annihilation when Jesus finally comes back and rescues them. And it makes reference to that here. When the power of the holy people, that is the Jews, is shattered, all these things will be completed. Daniel says, I heard but did not understand. So if you've been struggling with this, as I've been struggling with this, don't feel too bad. Daniel's the one that receives this vision. He says, you know, I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm not getting all this. So I asked my Lord, what will be the outcome of these things? He's curious, just like we are. Well, what's the angel's response to him? In verse 9, it says, he said, go on your way, Daniel, for the words are secret and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, cleansed, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly. None of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. The one who waits for and reaches 1,335 days is blessed. But as for you, go your way to the end. You will rest, then rise to your destiny at the end of the days. I love how that ends. That's Daniel's final message. The angel says that to Daniel. The faithful servant of God. Let me read that one more time. The last words that Daniel hears. But as for you, Daniel, go your way to the end, and you will rest, then rise to your destiny at the end of the days. What a beautiful promise. In the last few verses we read there, there's a lot to chat about. In verse 11 it says, from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation set up. So this is assuming a literal temple is going to be there, with a literal Antichrist that actually sets up an abomination, just like Antiochus Epiphanes did. He was a foreshadow of the Antichrist to come. The Bible says, and Jesus himself says, it's going to happen again. There's a man coming, the Bible calls him the lawless one, who's going to do the same thing Antiochus Epiphanes did. When that happens, it says there will be 1,290 days, which is interesting. That's caught a lot of people's attention, because 3.5 years, here comes a math question, get ready. 3.5 years, 42 months, a time times a half a time is how many days? 42 months, 30 days in a month. $1,260. And there are other places in the Bible that use that number, 1,260. Well, what number is used here? 1290, and then right after the 1290, there's another number, 1335. You're like, where are these numbers coming from? And the answer, quite simply, is the Bible never explains. So there's a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts, a lot of people have been interested in these numbers. The bottom line is no one knows for sure. There's speculation. I'm going to share a little, but understand it is just speculation. When the tribulation period comes to an end, it is 1,260 days. We know that because that is 3.5 years. The world's going to be in bad shape. And we're going to get a good look at that in the book of Revelation. God has wreaked havoc all over the earth. And before the millennial kingdom can be set up, there's going to be work to be done. So some people suggest that it's going to take 30 days to clean things up. Some people look at the 30 days or the following 45 days as maybe the time God uses to judge the nations. The Bible says there's going to be a judgment of the nations. Is this time frame meant for that? Maybe. To set up the millennial kingdom, for God to get the structures in place to rebuild the shattered earth and get it ready for the millennial kingdom. That's going to take time. So these are some of the suggestions that are out there. The Bible doesn't specify. All it says in verse 12 is that whoever waits for and reaches the 1330 days, 1335 days, so 75 days after the tribulation's ended, whoever makes it those extra 75 days is blessed. I take it that that would be the point the millennial kingdom starts. Because that's, I'm not sure what else the blessing could refer to. Maybe wrong about that. That's how I take it. So, there we go. The book of Daniel. A lot of information, a lot of questions. Hopefully some of them have been answered. Hopefully there's some more stirring. Because we said one of the main things we study Bible prophecy for is every time we answer a question, we get to ask new ones. And that's good because it keeps us in the Word. It keeps the Bibles open. It keeps us studying. And regardless of the positions or the outcomes that you end up with, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Okay. We don't have a lot of time. We've got maybe just a couple minutes. Any questions, comments on the book of Daniel?
I had a question. So, you mentioned kind of the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation. Are those right after each other? Is there space in between there?
That's a good question. And again, the correct answer is no one knows, for sure. You're going to hear that a lot. The tribulation has a definite biblical start point. And that is what we read. The Antichrist is going to sign a treaty. There's not any question about that, at least not in the premillennial point of view. So there's a sign associated with the beginning of the tribulation. Is there a sign associated with the rapture? There isn't. It could happen at any time. And then when the rapture occurs, how long is it between the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation? We don't know for sure. We can speculate a few things. In order for the tribulation to occur, we already said the temple's got to be rebuilt. So if the rapture happened today, and it could the tribulation start tomorrow? And the answer would be no, because first the temple has to be rebuilt. Because the Antichrist has to be in there to sign the peace treaty and set up the abomination. So we don't know how big of a gap is between the two, but there does appear to have to be some gap.
At least at this point.
At least at this point, yeah. Once the temple's rebuilt, then yeah.
Then you could have potentially
They could be back to back.
the rapture in that same day.
So the tribulation, the temple has to be back. The rapture, we don't have any warning signs for. It's a signless event.
Okay.
Anything else?
Do you think they could repurpose the mosque? Like if that mosque was given back to Israel?
That's a good question. I'm not a Jewish expert. My guess would be if I were a Jew and I were committed to the worship of God, and they said, okay, you've got two choices. This mosque is already here. We could just start worshiping God in it, or we could tear it down and build up a specifically Jewish temple like Solomon's was. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. Watch the news. Watch the news. Jerusalem is just a huge, it's a fascinating study. Yeah.
So I just want to clarify because I'm not sure I understood this before. The Jews have not, there's not been sacrifices since the temple was destroyed?
None. Which is a huge problem because if you read through the Old Testament, all of the worship of God centered around the sacrifices, which had to be done at the temple. And so when the temple was destroyed in the year 70, all the Jews were like, oh no, what do we do now? They're scattered, they're kicked, first of all, they're kicked out of their country because Rome's against them. So they're scattered all over the place, all over the world. They have no temple. The rabbis essentially had to redefine what it meant to be a Jew. So Jews today can't follow Old Testament law because the temple doesn't exist. There is a huge, huge body of rabbinic literature. That's what the rabbis are teachers who've popped up to fill in the gap caused by the destruction of the temple. And they have all of these man-made laws, kind of like what the Pharisees did, that try and explain, okay, now that the temple's gone, how in the world do we still maintain Judaism when the core of Judaism has been taken away from us? And there's all kinds of literature on that. But that's what the rabbi's job essentially is today. But it's not going to last. The temple's going to be rebuilt. And when that happens, well, times will be interesting, to say the least. Okay. Can I give you a little homework for next week? A little bit? Okay. I would like for you to read what Jesus has to say about the tribulation period. This will be the last major study before we go back to Revelation and take a look at the book itself. Jesus had a lot to say about the end times in Matthew 24. It's called the Olivet Discourse. So it's just one chapter. If you would have that read before next week, Matthew chapter 24, let's hear what Jesus himself had to say about this end time period. Okay. And with that, we have somebody to